All right. Today, I have a really cool opportunity to interview someone from Nebraska who has had some great success in Hollywood. Marion Dayre is a writer and producer who hails from Superior, Nebraska, and has now been in Hollywood for several years. In her early days, she assisted producers with shows that we've all heard of: The Goldbergs, Curb Your Enthusiasm, United States of Terra. And do you remember that, I don't know, kind of popular show called Better Call Saul? Of course, you've heard of it. We've all heard of it. She was a writer and executive story editor for that show, and her 5 seasons on that show even earned her 4 Writers Guild of America nominations. She's got numerous awards and nominations for her work, including 4 Emmy nominations, a Peabody Award, several others. It's really cool. One of Marion's most recent accomplishments has been a show that she created, is head writer for, and executive producer for Marvel's Echo, a series on Disney Plus and Hulu. So that's super cool, and I'm so excited to be able to learn about her career and her experiences. It's very fun to have her today. So without further ado, welcome, Marion. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. It's finally stopped raining in Los Angeles, so yeah,
Finally,
nothing to
summer. Well, you know what? I would say I feel sorry for you having that type of weather out there, but I'm in Nebraska and it's like 50-mile-an-hour winds out right now. So.
Yeah, I was back there a couple weeks ago visiting my parents, and it was snowing when I landed, and 10 days later it was 70 degrees when I left. And I think again, and then got cold again
Yep,
after.
that's kind of how it goes. That's kind of how it goes. Well, very good. So, well, I just kind of have to say, to sort of start out, reading your bio and seeing all the shows that you've worked with and what you've done. I mean, I'm sure this could be a really long answer, and we'll dig into it. But just to start off, how does a person from Superior, Nebraska, end up in a place like Hollywood? I mean, that's got to be quite the journey. How did it all start for you?
Uh, well, I was lucky enough to know a man named Lou Hunter, who's from Superior, passed away not too long ago, unfortunately. But he taught me how to write, and he is was a screenwriting professor at UCLA, and would run these summer screenwriting workshops in Superior, called the Superior Screenwriting Colony. And I I did one of those workshops on many things led up to that. I tried to do pre-med, and I worked at Aldo Shoe Store, and I had many different jobs. I worked for the railroad, and all roads kept leading back to writing. I had met Lou when I was in junior high school, and the summer before I moved to LA, I took his 2-week screenwriting course in Superior, and that was enough evidence for me to know that's what I wanted to try to do. So I put all my stuff in my Grand Am and drove out here.
Wow. That's crazy. So, guy, wow, he went back all the way to Superior, and he was out. What a connection that is for people in Superior. Was he from Superior originally then?
Yeah, actually, I think he's from Guide Rock, and
Oh,
then he and his wife Pamela had a home in Superior and would spend the Nebraska winters in California, where Lou was a professor and a chair of the Department of Screenwriting at UCLA Graduate School. So he had talked to me over the years about, if you really want to pursue writing, especially screenwriting, consider Los Angeles and UCLA. And that always kind of stuck in the back of my mind, after meeting him in junior at a class in Superior Junior High. He would come visit
wow.
our creative writing class, and then years later that kept calling back to me. So I found
What an
myself
awesome
going
connection.
back to him. Yeah.
Well, so what did you do after high school then?
After high school, I went to Concordia, Seward,
Okay.
on a scholarship for volleyball and biochemistry. And my dad's a mortician. My dad, my uncle, my grandpa. Um, and there are a few careers that seem reasonable to me. In Nebraska, it was like teaching, uh, medical field. Those were really the two that I was considering. I liked
Hmm.
English, but I think I was better at science in high
Okay.
school. So I went to college thinking that I was going to be pre-med and maybe possibly work in the funeral home with my dad and my uncle. And that I did an exchange program in New York. There's Concordias all over the country. So I
Yep.
did one semester in New York, which turned into 2 semesters my second year. I started taking more creative writing classes, and I saw my first off 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 Broadway show, whatever I could afford.
Way off Broadway.
Way off Broadway, probably out in Bronxville. It was so far off Broadway. And it was just so amazing to me, that people were writing and writing things that were being produced, and like it was just such an amazing experience for me witnessing the production of it, that I became really interested in writing as an actual viable career path. I mean, the only writer that I really knew from Nebraska was Willa Cather, or
Right.
uh, you know some novelists that were long gone that I couldn't talk to. And then
Right,
there was,
right.
who had been out here screenwriting and things like that. So I switched pre-med and I got a job. The only writing job I could find in Nebraska was a journalist for the railroad. And I found an ad in the Lincoln Journal Star that said, "Do you like to write? Do you like to travel? Do you like to have fun?" And I was like, yeah, all three of those things sound really appealing to me. So I went into this office called Newslink in Lincoln. Lovely place, lovely, awesome people. And they hired me with no journalism experience and taught me um, how to do journalism. And I traveled all around on freight trains and going to different rail yards for 3 years until I realized that journalism really it wasn't scratching that itch quite enough.
Right.
And it was a dead of winter. I'll never forget this. It was a dead of winter in Lincoln on my lunch break. And I just felt so aimless and sad and kind of, I just didn't know where the road went. And I went out to my car on lunch break and I called Lou Hunter, um, who I hadn't talked to in a few months, and I said, this is a situation, I'm just like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm not okay. And he said, I've been waiting for this phone call for 10 years. It's time to
Oh, sweet.
go. It's time to go to LA. Come do the screenwriting colony, and then we'll talk about, moving to LA.
Wow. And so you went to that screenwriting colony, and then it just sounds like that was such an eye opener and just opened so many doors. And then you applied to the Masters of Fine Arts screenwriting program at UCLA. I can just only imagine just the excitement when you felt like you finally had maybe found this thing, and to move all the way out to California. What was that like? So you just moved out there like shortly after that conversation?
Yeah, I did the 2 week workshop. I wrote a terrible script they'll never show anyone for any amount of money. And yeah, and then I packed up a U-Haul with my friend Cami, and my sister and my dad uh we drove in a caravan out to LA with the few things that I had in my Grand Am, and my TV fell out at a gas station in Albuquerque. So I arrived in LA with no television, and I didn't have a job. The only person I knew in LA was Lou, who was only here for a quarter every year, for a semester every year. So I didn't know
Yeah.
what I was getting myself into, and I'm really glad that I didn't, because if I knew how hard it was going to be for the first couple of years, I might have made a different decision. But luckily my parents were believed in me enough, or thought I was going to come back in 6 months. Like, I don't know what they thought, but it must have been scary dropping me off.
Yeah, no
Play.
kidding. So
Yeah.
so you go there, and then you do that. You end up pursuing your master's degree out there. And I would imagine just getting into that program in a place like UCLA. I mean, the connections that you have. I mean, and you're there. You are in Los Angeles pursuing screenwriting there. It must have just had a lot of connections, I would imagine. Is that kind of how it works there?
Well, I didn't apply for the master's program for 5 years. I knew I wasn't going to get in at
Oh,
first, because
okay.
like they only take 25 or so people every year. And I wasn't good. The only script I had written was this one thing in the 2 week workshop. So I
Right.
needed more experience, and I also needed a job, or I wasn't going to be able to pay my rent out there. It's a lot of money. So
Right.
I enrolled in this it's called the Professional Program in Screenwriting at UCLA. It's a night program so that people can still work full time, and it's not a graduate. It's in between an undergrad degree and the master's, and they teach you the repetition of writing scripts. So in that program, I wrote 3 feature-length scripts while I was babysitting, nannying for money, and then I was applying for internships so I could start to get my foot in the door, free unpaid internships at production companies. So I was able to go work at Sony Pictures and that as a development intern, reading scripts for production companies to see whether I thought the boss should read them, essentially, is what I was doing.
Gotcha. So you were kind of doing all that. I mean, that's got to be a common way for people to start, I would imagine. Like you got to start somewhere, right? So you go, you take these classes and you just get these kind of these jobs just to get your foot in the door, right?
Yeah. I wanted to learn as much as I could. I wanted to find this was important for me, has been all throughout my career and personal life, is finding people who have what I want. And Lou was the first person. Like, he was just so joyful. He had so much joy in creativity. He was such a believer in other people's dreams and abilities. And he was one of the first. There were several people, mainly teachers and professors, who made me feel like I had the right to believe in myself and that I could really do this thing. So when I came to LA, I think I was more daring than maybe some other people starting out are, in that I was very specific about the people that I was trying to work with and around. Like, I really looked for people who were doing what I wanted to do and then offered to help them for free and do whatever they wanted. And one of these people was Laura Ziskin, who is a producer and had started the Stand Up to Cancer Foundation. And she was the first person that I got an internship for at Sony Pictures. And I just kept calling their office. I was older for an intern. I was 26 when I moved to LA, and a lot of interns were like 18, 19. And I kept calling their office and saying, what? It doesn't matter what you want me to do. I have a driver's license. I'll come in there anytime, and I'm a hard worker, and I'll learn. And I think they probably got tired of me calling, because they finally said, come in. And one thing that kept me coming back there past the time when I think I normally would have, is that I knew how to drive a stick shift, and I was the only intern in the office who could drive a stick shift. So I would take Laura's car every day over to the Palisades to pick up her lunch and from her chef, and bring it back to the studio. So, like,
wow, what a skill. You never thought that skill would just come in so handy for your career early on.
Yeah, seriously. My dad taught me how to drive a stick when I was like 14, and my first car was a stick shift. So yeah, that
Wow,
paid
and you
off.
just stuck with it. I can just only imagine just the maybe the imposter syndrome, or just how competitive it is. There's so many people trying to move to California, I feel like, or that are already out there maybe trying to make it, and you just have to keep at it and find people that you trust and that you want to work with. Did you feel that way? Did you feel imposter syndrome, or did you just feel like there's too many people trying to do this ever? How did you keep your focus?
That's a really good question. I felt like I didn't have a backup plan, which really helped. Like, there was no other job that I thought I might do. And I think that kept me in a lot longer. It's like, literally, I don't know what else I'll do. And that's the
Right.
only reason that I came here. So I'm going to keep trying to do it. And I knew I know certain things about myself. I know I show up on time. I know I will do everything I can to learn how to do the job well. I know that I don't have to be told very many times how to do a certain thing. And I know that, you know, I know I'm going to show up and do the work. And what I learned early on, and has stayed true, is that you get jobs just as often by being somebody that other people want to be in a room with. for 12 hours a day. Like if they want to work with you and you're a good person to work around, they would like that. Just
Yeah,
as
exactly.
like if you're the best writer in the room and you're a jerk, you're not going to make it very far because people have to spend a lot of time with you, especially in television. You're going to
Yeah.
write together for 12 hours, 12 hours a day at a time
Yeah.
sometimes.
Wow. So now early on you did all these things. You worked for some shows. I mean, I would imagine I mean, I kind of want to fast forward to obviously the big show that you would have been working on at first early on were like Better Call Saul, maybe not early on, but after a while, but you'd also worked for these other shows. I mean, what show did you work on where there was like this turning point? Because when I also saw that you worked with shows like The Goldbergs, Curb Your Enthusiasm. I mean, these are all big shows, but that was early on. Where was this kind of turning point where you're like, "Whoa, I'm working on a popular show now."
Yeah, it feels I'm very, very, very fortunate uh in the kind of caliber of shows that I've been able to work on. I think from the very beginning they were prestige shows that were on premium networks. The first show that I worked on was for DreamWorks and Showtime. It's called United States of Terra with Toni Collette, Brie Larson, Diablo Cody, and Joey Soloway. And I think it's funny because I would consider my first writing job to be Better Call Saul, and that I had done 8.5 years of work in this field before I got that job. So most of the time when people are talking about a lucky break, it's it's not so lucky because
Right.
you've been doing so much hard work ahead of time, and then but you are very fortunate to have an opportunity come up, but you have to have all of the years of work and the willingness and the know-how to be able to take that opportunity and do well with it when you get it. So definitely when I got the first staff job at Better Call Saul, that was a big moment for me. It was fun. It was the first time where I was paid to write and not paid to be an assistant or a support staff.
Yeah. Wow. So, do you have like a process for your writing? Like, how do you, I mean, I would imagine these jobs you're very busy, you got a lot going on, but then writing takes some just focus and everything. Do you have sort of this process that you go through to try to maintain this busy life schedule or that you have, but then also find just that headspace that you need?
Yeah, it took me a lot. I mean, it took me some burning out, if I'm being honest with you, and a lot of ways of not not finding balance well, to be able to do both things. And there was a earlier version of myself where I was so afraid to actually get to the page. Um, I think writing is the scariest part of writing, and figuring things out. Like a lot of people can say I'm a writer, and they're not writing. They're not actively writing. It's scary to put the thoughts down on the page because what if you can't do your idea the way you think you can? What if it's not good enough? What if people read it and don't like all the negative untrue narratives we tell about ourselves usually come up when you're in draft. So
Right.
I would do just about everything I could to stay out of that. It was amazing how many times I could reorganize my silverware drawer instead of
Right.
when I was ready. So, early on, I put the work off for a really long time. I'd call my mom often, uh, nervously complaining, about the work. And then I would spend 4 or 5 days before a deadline up all night, barely eating, uh, you know, cramming through. Um, and it takes a lot of guts, I think, to do it a different way. Meaning, like, if I do everything at the last minute, I kind of have, and if it doesn't turn out as well as maybe it could, I can say to myself, of course it didn't. I didn't have enough
Right.
time, you know. But if I really take my time and I really like make the time to do it well, then I take ownership over that thing and I have more responsibility. And little by slow, I've worked out a situation, for a scheduling, I guess you would say, system for when I'm writing pilots, the first episode of a TV show. And I write anywhere from 3 to 6 scenes a day, depending on how many scenes are in the script. And once I get those scenes done for the day, I don't work ahead. I'll go out and walk or run or watch TV. I'll do something that I enjoy, and it's been really important for me to figure out how to do that, how to not work, not always sit with my laptop planning to write a scene.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Well, that's exciting, and Better Call Saul, no doubt, was like a big turning point in some way. Like you got a big job with a big show.
Yeah, I did, and I knew, I knew Bob Odenkirk prior to working on that show. I had written a lot before then. And I spent the first season on that show as the writer's assistant. So I was the person in the room taking all the notes. I wrote all the scenes for casting for all of the characters, season 1. So when they go into audition, when an actor goes into audition, they don't oftentimes read the actual scene from the script, because that content usually protected, especially for a bigger show. So assistants or perhaps writers on that show will write made up scenes
Oh,
uh,
really?
that kind of encapsulate the character, called sides. And so I wrote all the sides for the character season 1. There were a couple other assistants that wrote a few as well. And so Vince and Peter, the showrunners on Better Call Saul, started to get familiar with my writing that way, because I was writing some supplemental materials for the show. So I didn't have any expectation to write an episode that first season. One thing I learned along the way as an assistant is, like, I'd go in and do the job I was supposed to do. I wasn't going in right away asking my bosses if they could read my script or give me a better job.
Right.
I wanted to do the job that I was doing. So after a year of writer's assistant, that went, that I was able to do my job pretty well, they added a second job, season 2, called script coordinating. And that's the person who edits all of the scripts for continuity, grammatical errors. The writer gives me the script, and I do a pass to clean it up before I give it to the showrunner, so it's nice and tidy when they read it.
Okay.
And then I go back and forth between the writer and the showrunner to make sure all of the showrunner's notes get put into that draft. And once it's ready, I turn that draft into a production draft. It's just different formatting. I send it out to all the cast and crew and the executives at the studio. So that job helped a lot, because it helped me a lot with my writing, to show me what kind of thoughts the showrunners were having on the writer's first draft of the script. Often the script coordinator is the only person who sees the changes in the drafts between the writer and the showrunner before that draft is sent out. So I saw the writer's work be elevated through notes passes with the showrunner. And the executives at the studios got to know me as well. So all that to say, by the end of season 2, when Vince invited me to co-write the season 2 finale with him, I felt pretty comfortable in that spot. It was still terrifying writing the first script with somebody that I respect as much as him.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of X-Files and his first script, Home Fries. I just think he's such an incredible writer. That you were talking about imposter syndrome earlier. It took me a while to believe that I deserved that opportunity, but he was very kind and very encouraging, and that half script earned me the chance to become a writer season 3. So that's how
Wow.
that writing job happened. There's a lot of
Yeah.
there are a lot of kind of
Well,
bumps to it.
I bet. Well, that's the thing. And I think that's cool to hear your process because I think so many people might think, I want to be a writer or I want to go, especially if it's something like as big and as flashy and as cool as being out like in Hollywood with movies and shows and all that. I want to be a writer. I want to be a director or an actor or whatever. And a lot of times you're thinking of the end game of like where you're at, like, oh, I'm a writer for a show, and you just said you took 8.5 years to get to this point for Better Call Saul, and then you still had to like prove yourself once you were there and work really hard. And so, I think a lot of times it's easy for people to have this goal in mind, but you really have to be willing to just appreciate the process and go through the grit to for that eventual end game because it's going to take a while.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. And I mean, I think you're bringing up something really, really important, which is like when you're starting out at doing something in any field, the content that's available for you as evidence of success in that career is not coming from someone who's starting out in that job.
Right.
So when I started writing, I wasn't reading the scripts of other beginners. Like I was coming out there expecting like, I want to write like Vince Gilligan. I want to make movies like Steven Spielberg. I want to the content that I'm absorbing is that kind of thing. So I think it takes you have to go in there, I think, with clear eyes, knowing that the first thing I have to do is read a scene and figure out what a scene is, figure out what scene headings are, figuring out what makes a script good, what makes a script bad, read a lot of bad scripts, write a lot of bad scripts, because if I start out and I'm only comparing myself to people who have already been doing this for 25 years, I'm just going to write a full script off the bat. It's not going to work. I'm not going to understand why it doesn't work. I'm going to get hard on myself. I'm going to feel like I can't do it and I'll give up.
Right.
So I think that work isn't important just because you have to put in the work, but also if you are a true believer in any field, if you're a true believer in I'm doing this because I want to create, I'm in it for the craft and I want to eventually be the best kind of artist or best person in this career that I can possibly be, then all of those steps along the way are essential in building the muscles that you have to have.
Yeah. Wow. That's yeah, absolutely. That's a really that's great to hear and very interesting. You're right. It's a process. So I've got to ask, working in Hollywood, to so many of us, I mean, let's be real. It looks amazing, right? On TV, like you said, you see kind of the end game and all this. The thought of being close to famous actors and production studios and just all the excitement that goes along with what we kind of see is as a viewer and a person that enjoys watching movies or shows or whatever. What could you say? What's it like out there? What's the culture like around? Is it are there different pockets of it? Would you say it's super just cutthroat and competitive all the time? It must be competitive. All right, is it friendly in some ways? What is the culture like in general?
That's a really good question. And I think I could find any of those things depending on what my perspective is, and I think, what do they say? They say a miracle is just a shift in perspective. So if I believe that someone else's success is equal to my failure, like if I feel like someone else getting a job means that something's been taken away from me, then the whole culture of Hollywood seems daunting and competitive to me. But
Mm,
the reality is that there's space made for every person with something to say who knows how to say it, because no two people say things the same way. So there's an infinite number of jobs available if you have something to say and you're able to put in the work to execute it well. And there's certainly, well, I've been to some really impressive premieres with a lot of big names and fancy dresses and cocktails and Emmys
yeah.
and this and then the truth is like a premiere is the celebration that you get to have for something like Echo, which took 3.5 years of work for those 6 episodes that you saw come out in
Yeah.
January. So by the time we get to that premiere, a lot of other things have happened, and a lot of the reality of it is, six writers who are in t-shirts and jeans, showing up with their sack lunches, sitting around a conference room, playing with little desk toys. I have my paintbrush that I bring along,
Right.
and um, we're talking about characters for 8-10 hours a day. And then part of the job of show running too is like, it's not my job as a showrunner to come up with all the right ideas. It's my job to create an environment where other smart people can do their jobs well. So like a part of my job is managing people, hiring people, looking at budgets, making sure people are being paid and credited correctly, having hard conversations with studios about what we can afford and what we need to cut. And going back to writers and having hard conversations, like, we can't extend your contract beyond this number of weeks, so unfortunately you can't continue working even though we'd love to have you. It's a budget thing. So all those kind of conversations that I have to pump myself up for, and shed tears over.
Yeah.
Those happen in between the fancy dress nights.
Right. Right. You're like, and then, once in a while you just need to celebrate and have a good night because you've had so many daunting nights too. So,
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's a definitely a mix. Right now, I'm on deadline with two pilots that I'm developing, and it's terrible. No one likes writing. Not like the best writers don't like writing. We like having written. I like finishing
right.
this and being like, I've just written something awesome. I hope I never
Right.
have to write again, because I might not be able to pull that pull that off again.
Right. Well, I mean, I can only imagine the amount of writing you've done is crazy. But when I was working years ago on my dissertation, similarly, you talk to people that just put it off, right? They're just like working on their proposal for their dissertation and then the actual dissertation itself. And it's so easy to put it off. You can come up with every excuse in the book. And one guy said to me once something that was helpful to hear. He had already finished his PhD and he just goes, Jeff, thinking is writing. Or writing is thinking. He's just like, you think you know what you want to say, but you actually don't until you're actually putting it on paper. And you kind of alluded to that earlier. So if you can't think of what to write, you just have to write, because that is your thinking process, is as you're writing, and then you're going to go from there. So do
Yeah,
you find
yeah,
that?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I know I was talking about procrastinating earlier, and there's part of it, but I think a lot of writing too is studying and immersing yourself in the human condition. So like, I think 90% of writing is not writing. It's just going out in the world, paying attention to how people think, feel, and act, and then coming home and telling the truth about it and telling your neighbors about it. Like, that's writing from the dawn of time. That's how like cavemen pass down their history, is just experiencing things and then writing it down. So
Yeah.
we can, I don't think you can be a good writer and never go out and have a cup of coffee with your friends. You can't just shut yourself in a room and I think tell and say what needs to be said about the world. I think you have to go out into it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I definitely want to we'll get to your big thing that just happened this year, your big show that you spent 3.5 years on. So it's funny because it's like it came out, so it's all the excitement to all of us as viewers, and to you, I'm sure it's very exciting, but it's also kind of a long time coming. So first off, Echo on Disney Plus, Hulu. You're the creator, head writer, and executive producer. First, I just want to say congratulations for creating that show and for getting it out to the world. That's exciting.
Oh, thank you. There's so many people uh, that were involved with it, in the creating of it, in the producing of it, in the execution of it. So it really does take a whole team, and I couldn't be more proud of what came out of it. And it certainly wasn't easy. I think, to be more accurate, I think it was closer to 2 years. I was trying to think back about when I first came into the show, but we spent about 11 months in the script development phase before we went into prep. And then there was quite a long production and post-production period.
Wow. So how did you get that opportunity to create a show for Marvel? I mean, just when you hear the word Marvel, it's just kind of like it just has this, it's something that everyone's familiar with, the Marvel universe and so many shows, movies, and all of these things. How did you come across, how did you get this opportunity to do that?
Yeah, there are a lot of times when I will kind of chase a property down because I love it so much and want to work with it. There's a book called Geek Love that I just thought it was the best thing ever. But anyway, I'm telling you the difference between I read that book and I had my reps chase it around for a few years before Warner Brothers would. I got a meeting with Warner Brothers and I really pursued that. And this with Echo was a different experience in that Marvel reached out to me, the creative executives and the team at Marvel reached out through my reps to set a meeting. They asked me to come in and meet with them on a certain piece of property that they had. I didn't know, I had to sign an NDA before I came into the meeting, and
Wow.
I didn't know what the interview was for. And I was actually working in the writer's room on another show at the end of that season of a show called Shantaram when I went in and met on Echo. Um, and that they had read and been a fan of some of my other work, and they were looking for something a little different this time than they were with some of their other shows, and they were talking about the Spotlight banner in which you could watch a show without digesting some of their other material. So it's meant
Right,
to
right.
be a standalone show, a very character grounded piece, which was exciting to me. Like we both had the same kind of idea about good character drama from the very beginning. And I was very excited about this character, Echo, who I was familiar with through the Daredevil comics. I'm a comic, I really like comic books, but I wouldn't say that I'm an avid know everything about the comics thing. But I remembered Echo more as someone who was sort of like a side character in the Daredevil story than someone who had her own living, breathing story.
Mm.
So the concept of taking a character um, that wasn't a forefront of a comic and
Yeah.
building out a life for her and building out a story for her, that was really exciting for me because I felt like there was a big sandbox and a lot that we could do with her. So that's how
Yeah.
that conversation started. Um, and it kind of took off from there.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, yes, so the for anyone who, so for those who haven't seen it or are not familiar, the main character, first up, I just have to say it's hard not to watch this show and just kind of have a new hero in Maya Lopez. I mean, she is just this tough, badass woman who has all of these things working against her, but yet is just gutting through it. She's deaf, she's Native American. And she's underrepresented in kind of multiple ways, played by, is it Alaqua Cox? Is that how I pronounce the name?
Alakwa, yeah.
Alaqua, okay. And and so she signs throughout it because she's also deaf in real life, and she's Native American, and of course you don't see Native Americans represented on shows hardly ever. How did you find her for your show?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're lucky because her character appeared in the Hawkeye series, which came out before Echo. So she was established in the Jeremy Renner Hawkeye series for Marvel,
Gotcha.
which was before ours, and Alok was a fantastic performer. She was one of my favorite characters in the Hawkeye show. So delighted to have her back. And as you said, representation was really important to all of us from the very beginning. We had 5 native writers in the room who were enrolled across 5 tribes. We have 2 deaf writers in the room. It wasn't going to be an option to bring people on with a lived experience and make them consultants and not writers. So we had
Mm.
we had we had representation from the beginning in the writing stage, in the prep stage, in production. So, in wardrobe, in all areas, in all departments of production.
Wow. So how much of the character of Maya Lopez did you all create? Or how much of it was sort of created like on the Hawkeye series and then you were like developing it? Did you kind of initially have she was there as this character and then you kind of had to give her like a background and kind of and all of these things? How far along was it until you came to your part of it?
Yeah, some of the background was there already from Hawkeye, and a lot of it, we got to step out and really build. Hawkeye takes place in New York, and we knew that Maya Lopez is from Oklahoma. We had agreed on we're going to make her from a small town in Oklahoma. And it was really important to all of us. And it's important to me in my other writing as well to really focus on making the world its own character. So
Mm,
it's very important to us that like Oklahoma felt like one of the main characters in the show, especially that small town feeling. So we talked a lot about our own experiences. I think I brought pictures from the Superior, Nebraska skating rink for the skating rink scenes.
did you really?
Yeah, there's a mortician character in the show who stitches up Maya Lopez early on. So a water
Nice.
tower, I use pictures of
Yeah.
a water tower. So some of that Midwest vibe was in there. We've got a writer, Stephen Paul Judd, who was living in Oklahoma City. We were a Zoom room, so we had writers from all over the country. We had writers in Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona. Um, so we got to build Maya's family entirely, apart from her uncle and Kingpin, who were in Hawkeye. So
Okay.
we reimagined her powers from the comics. So some of the key things. So the things that were established, we respected and of course maintained, and then we were able to reimagine everything else.
Wow. Well, that is super exciting. I'll just take a couple more minutes because I know we've been going for a little while, but this has just been so fascinating to hear your story. So I really appreciate it. So I'm curious. So you worked on an Echo, it just came out and all that, and you said you're working on two pilots right now. How does a writer and a producer like yourself keep going right now? People are reaching out to you sometimes to work on things, which is awesome. Like, how do you come up with your next project? Is it kind of a combination of your own creative energy that you're trying to put forth and find a way to make it happen, or others reaching out, or just kind of depends where you're at in between projects?
Yeah, it's a mix and match. That's a really good question because I mean, that ideally for us all, we want to write an original passion project and go straight over to, pick your studio,
Right.
HBO or Peacock or Hulu or wherever you want to work and say, I have this great original idea. Do you want to make a show about Nebraska? Which is what I would love to do. And then the reality of this past year is it's been a difficult year for the whole industry. We had this writer's strike, we had the
Yep.
actor strike, we're looking at an IATSE strike potentially coming up. And
What's the last one? I didn't understand that.
IATSE is a union of many other departments. I mean, like if you haven't, everybody should read about it if you haven't. But many people
Okay.
are covered in that in that group of people. There's a lot of crew members that are members of
Okay.
the so the sort of the buying culture of studios has shifted, and I think we're going to see a contraction of fewer shows being made. That probably are going to continue to depend on IP for a while. So you'll see a lot of shows that are based on other shows, they're spin-offs or they're based on books or source material of some kind. So, there's part of it that's I want to come up with my next idea. And then there's part of the reality of it, which is I need to pursue projects that have a real potential being set up or are already set up with a production company and a studio and a network, and write them there too. So the pilots I have right now, one is something at Apple, where the studio and the production company came to me and said, do you have a take on this particular subject, inspired by a book? So I worked that up. Another project came from a general meeting I had a few years ago with somebody at Blumhouse. And
Hmm.
Blumhouse has rights to all the NBC Dateline episodes.
Oh, I
So
watch those all the time.
me too, me too. And so I was like, I met with Kyle Chalmers, who's a lovely person and has since moved on to Fox. And so at that meeting, I got pretty jazzed on some of my favorite NBC Dateline properties. So I went home, wrote down some ideas about my favorite ones, called them back, and gosh, that's been a couple years now, over 2 years ago. But now I'm writing a pilot for Peacock about one of the NBC Dateline, scripting one of the NBC Dateline shows. So it's kind of a combination. That's a long answer for
Yeah.
love to do a show about that's set in Nebraska one day soon.
Well, I would imagine. I mean, it's this weird thing where you want your ideas, you want to see them come to life. Sounds like it would be so much work to get all of that to for people to buy into it, and then all that goes into it. On the other hand, when people reach out to you and ask you to do something, that's so exciting too. And you're like, sure, I would love to work on that project. And so it's kind of this combination. You can't do all things, right? You spend time either creating something or when people reach out to you and they're offering you work and they want your expertise, you want to work on those too. And so in a perfect world, you're maybe trying to find time for both of those things when you have time for it.
Yeah, you're trying to find things time for both, and you're trying to keep the joy in just the process, because a lot of what you write isn't going to get made, and that's not necessarily the point, right? You want to continue to the fear for me is that writing will stop being fun because it becomes too much of a job. So how do you make it work when your hobby becomes your job and your job is your
Right,
hobby too, and
right.
you find the time to separate those. So sometimes I do have to pull myself back and say, you know, it's okay to not take a money. It's okay to get a little less pay for this one, or it's okay if this never sees the screen, because it's about the process of making the thing and working with other really talented creatives that I care about. And that's the thing too. Helping other writers get work and watching them start to believe in themselves, doing the thing that Lou Hunter did for me. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole thing of it.
That's cool. I want to maybe ask you one more kind of question that just to satisfy my curiosity, and then we'll go on and everything. I feel like I could just ask you like 20 more questions, but we can't go on forever. Okay, so you're out there, you've worked with famous people, you see famous people and all that. Do you still get like kind of excited when you're just like around a famous actor and then you get to work with them? Or have you gotten to the point now you've done it enough or you know you need to keep your cool and it's just like another day at the job? How does that how's that?
Oh yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, there's some kind of celebrity, a few, but like the people that I get really starstruck over are maybe not the one. I'll tell you, it was a special moment for me when I met Zach Galifianakis, Jack Black, Will Ferrell. Those were
Okay.
all ones where I was like, wow, this is Lady Gaga. Did not meet her, but she walked right by me at a
Yeah.
Producers Guild Award show, and you're just kind of like, wow, I'm in the same room with people that just have this aura about them, where the whole room kind of tips in a certain direction. Um, but the people that I get really excited about um, are, some of my favorite authors that maybe other people wouldn't recognize. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to meet Salman Rushdie in Boise, and it was just incredible. I was like, I can't believe this, Mitch Hurwitz, who wrote Arrested Development. I met him one
That's
time at a
awesome.
show, and those are just the moments where you're like, wow, you're the reason that I come out and do what I do. I grew up watching your things and loving them, and um Yeah, just people that have what I want.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so cool. Well, hey, Marion, thank you so much for taking time to be here. It was so much fun to hear about your story and how you ended up out in California and the setbacks that you had and the challenges you had, but then the successes that you've had. You've just done so many cool things already, and I'm excited for you and just learning more about what opportunities will lie ahead. And I just really appreciate you taking time to be here today. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I think it's so cool you started a podcast, and I can't wait to hear more episodes.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, thank you. All right. Well, take care.
All right, you too.